nostalgia, memories, growing up in Central Florida in the 1990s. What a bunch of sappy crap. It's the Sappy Crap Podcast. Starring Steve Bauman and Jarman Day.
Welcome to the Sappy Crap Podcast, where the names are changed, but the stories are real. I'm Jarman.
And I'm Steve. That's right. The stories are real, or at least how we've kept the dark memento moris in the cemeteries of our minds.
How macabre of you.
Keep it light. Keep it light.
Keep it light. That's right. We're keeping it light because this week, on our last 3 episodes of the Sappy Crap Podcast, this one is the topic of death. Something we have not eagerly approached as a topic on this podcast as of yet, for obvious reasons.
But I think we'd be remiss to not at least talk about it a little bit.
Right, because we talked about all the things that kind of were important and shaped and formed our childhood and our young adulthood. And this is obviously a big part of that. You know, you can't help but be a big part of that, you know?
So I guess my opening question, I didn't actually prep you for this one, so I hope you have an answer. What was the first funeral you remember going to?
That's a good question. I had, growing up, a lot of family in southern Georgia, not the country, but the state. And there's a big old southern family, and I didn't really know them very well because we all lived in Orlando, Florida, but we'd go up to see them a lot and stay at a house. So we had a family house in Georgia. And so I believe it was probably one of those great aunts on that side or great uncles, and just a big southern, probably Baptist kind of funeral, the opposite of a wedding. And so I don't really recall too much, but I remember being there. That was like, but then, my earliest probably memory of like a family member, someone I actually knew really well, my grandmother. She died when she was pretty young, like 65, around that area. And I love my grandmother. She was a wonderful woman, very sweet and kind. But I was still very young. So probably around 8 years old, something around there.
Okay.
But that's definitely old enough to have memories of the funeral. But I remember it being very, obviously very sad, but it was also very Southern, and everyone brings food to a Southern funeral, and they're kind of high spirited at those things. They're not like, it's not very super depressing.
Not dour.
Yeah, it's not really dour. And they just really celebrated her life, even though she did die too young. But that was, my first funeral. What about you?
I think I must have been 7 or 8. And I want to say my parents are probably going to correct me on this episode a lot. But
mine too.
I think it was my dad's cousin.
Okay.
And I think he died in an auto accident.
Also Pennsylvania?
Also Pennsylvania. And I don't even remember where or how. The one thing I remember is we were waiting to go to the like after party. I don't know if there's a formal title.
Oh, there is.
Name.
I'm forgetting it, but there is a name. I'm totally forgetting it.
Yeah, the post-mortem. I don't know what else to call it. It's legit. That's legit.
No, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Legit. So we were waiting to go to that, and my dad was talking to somebody who was taking forever, and I was like an impatient 7-year-old shit. And I remember yelling across the parking lot, like, "Dad, hurry up!" My Uncle Harry came up and grabbed my arm and going like, "You calm down. We're at a funeral." but like me not understanding the gravity, because I had no connection to this individual that passed. I had maybe met them at a family reunion or something. But I had no emotional connection to what was going on versus the people around me, who this is someone they grew up with.
Yeah, probably a bad idea to bring young kids to weddings. Or I keep saying weddings, funerals of people that they don't know very well, because that's going to be a recipe for disaster.
That's right. But yeah, that's probably the first one. And I can't even say a name or who or where, other than somewhere in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And I think when I was a young kid, it was very weird to me, that first feeling of my grandmother passing away, because someone you knew I was close to. And it was like, this is weird. I mean, what do you mean she's not going to be around anymore? Like it was just still, I was young enough to where it was still just confusing more than really, really sad.
Right.
And so I don't remember super like being devastated or crying, because I feel like I was just really confused and that she'd come back or something. Like I don't really understand what's happening here, kind of thing.
Right.
And obviously my mom was very, very devastated. It was her mother. And so, it was weird, because I remember how weird that felt. It's like, what do you mean she's gone? That doesn't make any sense. So,
yeah, I think for me, that sort of moment, not say where I didn't get it, where my brain had trouble transferring over, is probably the death of my grandfather, which was 6th or 7th grade. I want to say. And he had been sick and he had kidney failure and he had been on dialysis. And if I remember correctly, he had had some sort of heart episode. And they decided that it wasn't worth, not say it wasn't worth it, but it wasn't a good idea to prolong that sort of suffering. So they took him off dialysis, and it was basically a countdown.
Gotcha.
At that point. And my mom and I and my dad were at some sort of retreat. That's all I can even tell you about it. We were at some sort of retreat because my mom is a minister and a writer and a reverend. And so she would lead, spiritual formation workshops and that kind of stuff. And we were at one of those. I want to say my dad and I went fishing the day before, and my dad got the call. And so my dad went up, was going to go up. And I remember him asking if I wanted to go with him because my dad knew he was going to go. He was going to say goodbye to his dad.
That was your dad's dad. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. My dad's dad. And I remember at the time, 12 years old, and I kind of regret this, but maybe not even really. At the time, I was up really late at night most nights, and I had this thought that like I was going to be the only one awake when Grandpa died.
Oh,
and that scared me enough that I opted not to go.
I get that, yeah. But she's a 12-year-old,
And so I stayed with my mom. She finished up the conference. My dad went up, and then we had planned to go up a few days later. And for whatever reason, my grandmother on my mom's side was also there. She maybe come to meet us or something. I wish I could remember the circumstances. She was coming down to visit us. And we were in this hotel because my mom was doing this event. And my grandma was like, well, I'm going to gather up your laundry and do your laundry.
That was nice of her.
And I was like, well, I don't understand because we're going to do that at home. And she goes, no, you're going to be packing to go to a funeral. And I in that moment just didn't it was one of those juxtaposition moments where I was like, oh, you're right.
So no one had told you that he already passed, or that they just knew he was going too soon?
I knew, but it was the first time that an adult had starkly said no, you're not going home. You're headed to Pennsylvania to go to your grandfather's funeral.
Yeah.
But he was alive at that moment. So it was just one of those weird mental things that I not even wrestle with, but I remember it to this day.
Yeah, and if anyone seems really practical and say something like that would be your mom's mom. She seems like a very straightforward, practical person. Straight shooter. No, you're going to a funeral. That's like, oh, okay, gotcha.
And then the mental block for years to come was every time that we would go to visit them, I would always mentally start by saying, oh, we're going to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Right.
And having to edit off to I guess we're going to Grandma's house.
Oh, yeah. That was weird for me, too, because growing up, every Sunday, my sister and I would go with my parents to Ruth's house. We call it. Ruth was my grandmother. My grandparents, and notoriously in our family, didn't want them to call them Grandma and Grandpa. So we called them by their first names. So it was Ruth, and then it was Big Jarman, because my grandfather was named Jarman. That's where I got my name from. And he was a big guy. He's a big Southern man, and so we called him, Big Jarman. And then there was Ruth. But for some reason, it was always Ruth's house, not Jarman's house. So when she passed away, it was a long adjustment phase, like you said. Instead of Grandma and Grandpa's house, it was just Big Jarman's house. And so it was just this is big. I had to get used to saying that, it's just a full dynamic change. And they did this whole thing when she passed away where he then changed the house to be like him. And it kind of became his bachelor pad, and he likes black and red. So my Big Jarman had the whole, my grandma's house, all the doilies and the nice, decorative dolls around places like that, and paintings were all changed up for ships and blacks and reds all over my grandparents' house. So it was a big change and a big adjustment at that point.
See, I think after my grandpa died, nothing changed at my grandma's house.
That's what usually happens. You kind of keep things the same. Yeah.
Nothing changed.
Keep it exactly as she left it.
Exactly the same.
Or, most men just don't really care. It's a house, whatever. But
let's talk about the next kind of deaths I think I remember experiencing were the deaths of pets.
Oh, yes, of course.
We had a cat forever. I think my parents got her 3 years before I even existed, named Gwen, who she had always just been around. Super sweet cat. And she had been sick for a while. She had diabetes.
Oh, no.
And kidney issues. And I remember I got to learn how to give her insulin shots.
To a cat,
which, mind you, my dad fully admits that I think he got basically at the hospital when they gave insulin shots, after they broke the seal on the insulin, it couldn't be used for another patient. And so they ended up throwing a ton of them away.
Oh, okay.
And he would just bring it home.
That's smart.
Instead of disposing of it. And my dad, I think at multiple times admitted, like, if I didn't get this insulin for free, we would go put the cat down.
Totally fair. Totally fair.
Totally fair.
Absolutely. I'm totally on that side. Yeah.
And so, mind you, she had been sick for a long time. And it was just one of those things where, like, we knew she was going to go.
Mhm.
Like, I mentally knew she was going to go. It didn't start me from being heartbroken.
Of course.
When it happened. But we knew. Like, we knew that was going to happen. But that was like, the first pet death that I'm like, oh, Gwen.
Because you were pretty much your whole existence at that point. She'd always been around.
She had never not been there.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, my father was very anti-pets, so we didn't grow up with any pets initially until we begged them to get a dog. And we've talked about this in the pet episode, probably.
Yeah.
But that didn't go well. It didn't last very long. But yeah, I didn't really have any pet deaths until just recently with my poor Mr. Bones, my cat.
Bones.
Yeah.
You drooly bastard.
He was wonderful, attention-seeking, like dog-like cat named Bones, black cat, named after Bones from Star Trek, of course. But I just had to like basically see him slowly get sick and die. And he had like what was it? I think a lot of cats get. It's like not an enlarged heart. It's something like that.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was something a lot of cats do get, but he got a little earlier than usual. And spent like the thousands of dollars to try to keep him alive, which we shouldn't have done probably, but he didn't make it. And it was just sad. Like he had his body in like this box and then bury him in the backyard. We have a giant, speaking of death and pets, my parents have a giant pet graveyard in the back of the house that all these different pets have, over the years been buried in, a lot of birds, things like that. And it's a pet graveyard, pet cemetery. And he's buried back there.
Yeah,
now.
back where the hammock used to be, right?
Oh yeah,
exactly. That corner. I remember the pet graveyard.
It's actually quite beautiful now. And there's these rocks that have these wonderful fungus that grows on top of them now. So it's like this really just like beautiful shades of green and iridescent colors, and it's just really nice. It's really pretty back there. So I'm glad Bones is back there now in his forever home. But yeah, so I mean, did you ever experience any other grandparents passing away?
Yeah, I mean, so let me preface the rest of this episode by saying I have been extremely fortunate in my life that I have never really had anyone truly deeply close to me die.
That's really fortunate.
Like, I have like incredibly fortunate, and that at the same time I also know it's a time. It's like a tick down.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Everyone dies, so I'm just on a clock until someone I really care about dies.
This is a time capsule of when you didn't know what that was like.
Right. My grandmother did pass away senior year, maybe junior year.
I think I remember
senior.
that. Yeah.
I think it was senior. And what I remember about it is as far as the lead up and how I found out is we were right at the end of senior year. We were neck deep in Night on Broadway rehearsals.
Oh boy.
Neck deep. I had a few solos. I think that's when I was playing Lumiere and Be Our Guest. And I had just made it to the front row in like my first Park Singers thing ever.
Right.
Like just the first time I'd ever danced my heart out hard enough and sweat enough to get to the front row. And I remember Mr. J, because I had a benefactor, one of my dad's friends who was a heart surgeon, write big fat checks like every year for my chorus account. So I always had like incredible amounts of money in my chorus account. So him getting on me, he's like, today's the last day for you to use your account to get tickets on Broadway. So you need to get those orders in. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. She's like, well, go out and call your dad. So I was like, okay. So I went out to call my dad to like ask how many tickets we needed for what night. Because I think we had family coming in. That was also when my mom was working up in Seattle and commuting down. So she was going to come down for a night on Broadway. So I needed to know what night she was going to be there. And I called him. And I remember he picked up the phone, which was surprising because I was expecting to leave him a message. So he was at work. And I was like, oh, hey, Dad, Mr. J, we just need to know how many tickets we need for what nights. And he goes, I mean, we can talk about that in a little bit. I'm coming to pick you up. And I was like, what? Why are you on your way to pick me up? He's like, well, Grandma died.
Oh.
and I just remember being like, what the hell was the chance of me calling my dad while he was on his way to get me?
That is weird timing.
And so I remember I was already outside the classroom. I was breaking down a little bit, as you do.
Yeah.
And this really aggravating girl, who I'll just call Nene, came out And she was bothering me incessantly. She'd been bothering both of us incessantly because she was right on the cusp of getting into Thespian Society.
Yes, I couldn't stand that girl.
And she really wanted it for her college transcript. But she like hadn't done any of the backstage stuff. Like she's like, well, I have enough credits. I just know the backstage. I was like, yeah, but that's the important part. Blah, blah, blah. And she came out, and so she started talking to you about it, like while I'm having this breakdown. I started turning her and yelling, I don't want to talk about it right now. and just putting my back against the wall and falling down and crying. And she went in and got like the class. So suddenly like all of Park Singers is watching me cry on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
Moments after I found out my grandma passed.
That's sad. But it was nice that hopefully they were sweet to you and tried
Everyone
to console you.
Yeah, I got hugs and condolences. Good. And I remember when I came back, there was like a hand-drawn poster and a plate of cupcakes that had clearly been in front of our door for like a day or two too long, left by some very nice girls. But then as far as like the funeral itself and going up to Pennsylvania, the only thing the two things I really clearly remember is we went to the funeral home. It was the same funeral home where my grandfather was buried. And I remember they always told the kids that there was pop in the basement because the basement was like a downstairs area with a coffee thing and a few chairs to sit. And the kids would often hang out down there. So there's pop in the basement. And we're all kind of standing in the cars. Everyone's pulling in. Everyone's kind of standing around and no one's heading in. And I remember my dad, who at the time was sort of the patriarch of the family,
take charge, guy.
We all don't have to go in together. And he grabbed my mom's hand and walked in and like led the charge in.
Oh, because they're all kind of waiting for the right moment.
Everyone was kind of milling around, like nobody wanted to go in.
Okay.
And the other thing I remember is my cousin, I think it was Charlie at the time, was 1 to 2 years old. And too young to understand anything that was going on. And my Uncle Tim and Aunt Pam went up to say their respects, walked past the casket, and I remember he saw Grandma and went, Grandma!
Oh.
And it was like such a smiling, laughing moment that just immediately just broke everyone in the room.
Of course.
Just broke everyone in the room. But yeah, those are sort of the two things I remember from my grandmother's.
Well, that's the thing I'd say probably my next funeral, because my grandfather actually lived, quite a bit longer after that. And my father was so much older than my mom that his parents had died a long time before I was even born, 70s. Oh yeah,
well, you had old dad.
Well, I actually met his mother, surprisingly. She was in her 90s when I met her. I met her once, but she was an abusive, terrible mother to him. So I only met her that one time. My dad didn't even come with us. So she died when I was like in college or something, and it wasn't a deal because I've only met her once. So I didn't even go up to Pennsylvania to see her because she's from Scranton. But anyways, besides the point, my next, when I was 15 years old, I had my stepbrother living with me. I had two stepbrothers at the time, and he's an older guy. He's probably about 23, I think, something like that, 24, maybe a little older, maybe as old as 27. I don't remember exactly. And I was 15, and he was a really cool guy. He was really into like the Grateful Dead, and he had all these glow-in-the-dark posters in his room, and he talked to stories about taking shrooms when he was younger, and he liked all the cool music my sister liked because my sister was 2 years older than me, and she liked all his music, and she thought he was the coolest. But he eventually passed away from complications from drugs, and that was when I was 15. And I remember that the most because someone so young, and him and I didn't get along super well, but he was a nice guy. It's just that we had nothing in common. I was like a little nerdy 15-year-old, and he was this really cool, hip 27-year-old. And so I remember coming home, and I had a date plan with my girlfriend at the time, Ariana, I'll just say her name. And we were going to go to the movies. And I come home, and Scott my stepfather's nowhere to be seen. And my mom tells my sister and I what had happened, that he had passed away. And I remember being so just dumbfounded that no emotions were coming over me, because I was just like, that's not possible. How is this possible? And so I went through with seeing the movie with my girlfriend. And I don't remember what we were seeing. I wish I did, but I don't, because all I did with that movie was just I finally just started crying in the very back seat of the theater. There wasn't many people in the theater at all. And what normally would have been a 15-year-olds making out in the theater hardcore and probably some hand stuff was instead just me crying into her lap, basically. The whole
save it for the sex episode, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
The hand stuff.
But yeah, basically just crying the whole time away, and I finally let it go. And but yeah, it was a really rough time for our family. But because my stepbrother, especially who's survives him, now has a family of his own, and he's moved on and lives a good life. But it's just a matter of the worst part of that being, though, is that you reminded me of it with your story of your grandma's funeral. Is he had an open casket funeral. They opted for that. And I hated it because this is a young, vibrant man. And you get to see him forever scorched into your brain, the image of him lying there dead with that not so lifelike kind of uncanny valley makeup on them to keep them looking fresh and alive, but it doesn't quite work. There's something kind of off about it. And just lying there. And we just sit there because we're like the main family. Sit there in the front row while people are coming over to greet us or say their condolences to my stepfather. And it was just terrible. And so I kept trying to find reasons to leave. And so did my stepbrother, thankfully, because it was his brother there too. He couldn't handle it. So we went off to the gas station getting some pop, as you would call it, in the north.
Yeah, there's pop in the basement.
Yeah, there's pop across the street. There's a gas station across the street. We kept finding excuses to go over there for this wake, which was just terrible. So I was, if I don't have my body burned to a crisp into ashes, which I hope is what happens to me, I definitely don't want to wake, because I would not want to put my family through that. I think it's terrible.
I want to be cremated so hard.
Yeah, I think cremated for me too.
The only reason I'm not necessarily down with cremated is because it does create a lot of pollution.
Hopefully they can find better ways to do that more in the future.
They kind of did. So this is crazy. It's called lye cremation.
Oh, where they kind of melt your body?
Yeah, they melt you down with chemicals until all that's left is your bones, and then they dry them out and they grind them.
That's pretty cool. I'm down with that.
Yeah.
Probably
the
expensive.
issue is that there haven't been a ton of EPA studies on what's going to happen when you dump that much lye into the sewers.
Just burns through the pipes.
Yeah. No, I remember, I've got vague memories of your stepbrother, Jason, and I remember his room was that corner room in your guys' house.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember for a long time, your parents were very iffy about us going in there.
Oh, like after the fact?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
I remember having sleepovers, and even though there was a bunk bed in that room, I had to sleep on your floor. For a long time.
That's why when we slept in my room for sleepovers, I forgot about that.
And it wasn't until a few years later that I think it eased up a bit. But the one thing I remember is that Sublime poster that was in the back right corner. That no matter what other else in that room changed, that Sublime poster was up until the last time I saw.
Yeah, it's finally gone now, but I think in general, you see this in movies too, but it's also true in real life. Parents kind of want to keep that room as like a shrine to the child that they lost, and I totally get that. I don't know how devastated I would be if I lost my own child. But yeah, then finally over time though, that room has become a very nice, pleasant kind of baby room actually, because whenever my stepbrother comes with his kids, or Ashley now comes with her baby, my sister, they have there's a crib in there permanently, so little babies can stay in there and stuff. So it's nice. And there's definitely there's a nice painting of Jason in that room, so he's kind of forever in there, which is kind of neat. But yeah, so it was a rough time, and then after that, I got to spend a lot of time with my grandfather, because not unlike your cat, he had diabetes for most of his life, but it was getting worse towards the end there of his life. And I got to spend a lot of time with him because I'm his namesake, which is kind of neat. He called me Junior. That's what he called me, which is really cute. And I even got to do something suggested by my mother to go interview him and take recordings of him asking questions about life and what it means to be a man, and bits of his history. And we had these long recordings of me just talking to him. And he's got this great Southern accent. It's kind of like, he sounds a lot like King of the Hill, except more Georgia South instead of Texas. But I'm pretty sure you got to meet him a few times.
Yeah, the one time I got to meet him was there was a terrible hurricane.
Oh yeah,
and your mom was afraid of him being alone at night. So you and me and an assortment of people,
right,
drove across Orlando in the dark and spent 2 or 3 nights at his place.
Yeah, it was a weird time. Hurricane Charlie.
That was weird,
but yeah, and he was just a really kind, loving soul. But he had strange feelings about women. But not strange feelings, but he loved loving women. And he always told me this. He's like, you can love as many women as you want, Jarman, but you just can't, love them. He would tell me that because he's basically saying, like, you can spread your love as much as you want and show that you love people. But, if you make a commitment to somebody, you're not going to break that commitment. But he was very flirtatious with a lot of women because he wanted to show that he loved people and he loved women especially. But he was right. Still a faithful person. He's very honorable. And that's like, I always looked up to that as like this great idyllic grandparent figure who's just, kind of just the epitome of a good, wholesome and strong work ethic from the South. He made his own way kind of thing. And luckily there was not an open casket for that funeral when he finally did pass away. And it was very sad to see him pass, but he lived a little bit longer. He had a little bit more time with his daughters. They knew it was coming. And so, yeah, it was bittersweet, of course, and I can't imagine what it's like for my mom and her sisters. But for me, it was like a changing of the guard kind of thing. And I knew it was coming, and I don't know, that makes it a little better sometimes. But
that's fair.
Yeah. Any other deaths in your life before I get on to my big one?
Not specifically. I've got my other grandma who's, God, she's like 90 something now.
She is kicking it, man.
She's
awesome.
Hanging out in Africa. She's like Alan Quartermain from League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The continent is keeping her alive with its magic.
That's a deep cut, man. Deep cut.
Deep cut. Sean Connery. Deep cut.
Sean Connery.
Who's
dead, actually.
Damn it. Sean Connery. But no, I don't like, we joke that she's going to live forever. She's just going to live forever. I know that's not the reality, but man. Yeah, she's been in Africa for like 20 years now.
That's
just
crazy.
Nuts. And she moved there when she was old already.
She volunteered for that crap.
I know. It's crazy.
Good for her.
But no, luckily, no other deaths that I can think of. I think of a few people. There's a girl we went to high school with who's one of those people that just died too young.
Mm-hmm.
Her name was Ruth.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember Ruth.
Just like my grandma's name.
She was in a car crash with a few other people that we were friends and acquaintances with, one of which I think you dated, if that sounds right.
And Ruth was a friend of mine, too, in school. We had a few classes together. And she's just a real
same here.
Nerdy, sweet person.
I remember she had a real aversion to being touched.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Like a real heavy aversion to being touched. And I remember one time, I can't remember, I got a roll or something, and she like asked if she'd give me a hug. And it was a big deal because she didn't touch anyone.
Oh, yeah.
It's like I'll always remember. She was a sweet, quirky girl. And then a guy I work with here named Rob, who, died doing what he loved, riding his motorcycle way too fast on the coastline.
That's terrible.
But that's what he loved doing. And all of his pictures on Facebook and Instagram were him and his bike in different helmets and like.
Hope he didn't have kids.
No, young guy. Okay. Luckily, I think he had a fiance, and that's about it. Not that it makes it any better, but
no. But when people like drive recklessly and they have children, I always think that's incredibly inconsiderate. But hey, if you're a young guy and it's what you love, exactly, like you took the chance, that was up to you. Yep.
So how you decided to live, and that's how you decided to die, ultimately.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about yours for the final stroke.
Yeah, I talked about this probably. We had on my dad episode, basically, or just dad's episode on Play on Nerds, I think, a long time ago. But my dad passed away probably about 3 years now, 3.5 years, something like that. I think I purposely don't remember the date exactly. I remember I'll just celebrate him on his birthday every year. I don't remember the day he died. I remember it was a little bit before his birthday, though, because he was about to turn 80 when he passed away. So I think that's why I get along with a wide variety of age groups and in a very friendly way. It's because my father was born in 1939. And he lived a long storied life with multiple different families over the years, but I was the last kid he ever had. So
certainly a lot of stories.
Yeah.
I can confirm that.
But it was kind of neat because I was the last kid he ever had. So I was like this young kid who has his dad who's the age of like some grandparents of Generation X people I know, where my dad's age was their grandfather, so it's kind of like I had this breadth of experience of him raising me and taking me to class and people picking me up and they're like, oh, your grandfather's here. I'm like, no, that's just my dad.
Yeah, I think when I met you, he was 64. Like,
probably. Yeah.
Like, I remember you being like, 64? Really? And he had that flat white hair that made him very hard to distinguish age-wise, like Steve Martin.
Oh, yeah.
Very hard to distinguish.
Like, I started going gray in my 20s, but he went super gray in his 20s and was pretty much white by his 50s, like just white. And so it was very Steve Martin-esque that so it kept him looking kind of youngish for a long time because you had no clue how old he actually was.
Right. Once he hit 45, he just locked in age.
Yeah, exactly. And he actually looked that pretty much the same way until about 65, and then 65, 68 maybe, and then suddenly it was a sharp turn off to looking like a very old man. But that's because he lived a very hard life, lots of narcotics and crimes and stress and drugs and sick, and so a lot of smoking and drinking,
dancing and rock and roll.
Yeah, pretty much. So he had emphysema and he had all sorts of breathing and he also had Parkinson's complications towards the end there. But it was kind of a long drawn out process, but it just kind of stunk because he got married to a new woman very late in that process, and they moved to St. Petersburg, Florida. And so my sister and I didn't really get to see him much anymore. And this woman was kind of a kook. She was very far right Republican. And so that's not really what me and my sister get along with. And my dad was never easy to get along with either because he's always telling stories. You never tell him he's telling the truth. And he was not very good with his emotions. And he's constantly telling us lies about his past. And so very complicated relationship. So towards the end, I wasn't very close with him because I really couldn't be. And that kind of sucked.
I remember your dad would start, it would sound like he was telling a story about when he was young. And you'd get 2 minutes into this really complex explanation, and then you realized he was telling a joke.
Yeah, sometimes that's the very end.
It would literally be 2 minutes of thinking he was telling a story.
Very authentic.
That's always how he phrased it. So, when I was young, I used to go down to the docks. Yeah, down to the docks, right down by the waterfront in Maryland. He'd go into this, and then suddenly you realize you're listening to a joke, but you wouldn't realize till you were too deep to get out.
Oh, and his all-time favorite one was that he carried a picture of this giant German woman, like supremely overweight German woman in his wallet. He'd tell a story about his girlfriend, and it'd be really sincere and sweet and how attractive she was and beautiful to him. And he'd pull out the picture and show it. That's like his punchline at the end, showing this giant German woman named Elga. And so that was just his go-to, I think, for the longest time. And that was just a very unfortunate thing, too, because then at the end, he kind of became a little bit super Republican and then very involved in this local church, the Knights of the, what the hell is it called? Not Knights of the Republic.
Knights of the Republic.
It's a
Calvary Assembly?
No, it's a Catholic organization, kind of like the Elks or like it's called Knights of the something. I can't remember. Listeners probably will know. I think it's probably international, but he joined that thing. And so they got this Catholic church they went to and another church. They go to two different churches. But the thing was, when I went to his funeral, my sister didn't even want to go because it was just complications. And also she couldn't fly down. It was just, and so I'm there with one of my many half siblings, but my half brother, who I'm actually close to, Joe, was there with me. And him and I were the only people that actually knew my father there. Everyone else was people that had met him within the last 6 months and thought he was this really Christian, really quiet guy because he couldn't speak very well at the end because he had Parkinson's and also the emphysema, so he couldn't breathe very well. So he was just very, very soft spoken and she couldn't say very much. Whereas my whole life, loud guy talking, we could not shut him up. He would tell jokes for hours and you'd be in a movie and he wouldn't be shut up. So but he was funny and outgoing, and they all thought he was this really pious, quiet ex-military man, which that's another story entirely. And I was like, so I wasn't going to say anything. I was there with my girlfriend at the time, Kate, but I convinced myself to go up and say a few words. It was my first eulogy I ever did. I did do a little bit one of my grandfather's though as well, but this one was a little longer because I'm actually an adult. And I just started talking about how he really was and how he was the funniest guy in the room. He was outgoing. You never knew if he was telling a story or not, and it was just weird saying that to an audience of people who didn't know who he actually was. It was kind of sad.
Right.
And it made me think, I don't want to have my funeral be a bunch of people that barely know me, so It makes you want to make a lot of friends and be close with people in your life so you can have people remembering you for who you actually are when you're dead. So maybe value that a little bit.
So a story I just thought of that I don't know when else I'm going to tell it. So I'll just go ahead and
Go
tell it.
for it.
So, Anna and I made this big move out here to California 7-ish years ago, something like that. And what really spurred it was Anna's father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, stage 3 moving into 4. I think it was colon, but by the time it's stage 4, it was like
it's kind of everywhere.
It was everywhere.
Yeah.
It was everywhere. And they treated it as aggressively as they could. But at the end of the day, his body just couldn't take it for how far it had spread. So we came out here knowing that he had, months to live before he passed. And so I'm working. Anna basically gets called to her dad's in the hospital. So she heads up to be with her mom and her family. I stay and I work, the day, make arrangements, and then head up the next afternoon.
Right.
So I get up there, go straight to the hospital. He's in his room, and her dad had moments of lucidity, but he was pretty far along. But his big thing was he kept trying to pull his catheter out and pull his IVs out because he really wanted to go home. He wanted to go home, or he kept saying, I have to go. And he had this urgency. And so I was in the room, and I think that maybe Anna and her mom had stepped out, and he starts trying to pull out his IVs, and a nurse comes and says, no, John. And she goes, come over here and hold his hand. So not knowing who I was, or the fact that John and I were not very close, she asked me to come over and hold his hand. And so I hold his hand so he can't, reach and rip out his IVs. And when I hold his hand, he looks down, and he had this moment of realization that someone was holding his hand, that he looked up and he made eye contact with me and had a moment of lucid realization. And he went, no, not you.
What do you mean? No, not you.
That is because of all the people in his world that he wanted to be holding hands with in the hospitals, I was not the one.
Oh, he's more like, no, not you.
Not you. Yes.
Oh, I got you.
That is my final real clear memory of any sort of connection with John, was him realizing who I was and going,
no, not you. I totally get that feeling.
Right. I get it. Because him and I were not close. He did not like me or really want me marrying his daughter. So in those moments where you're at the end and you have that moment of realization, you want it to be your daughter or your son or your wife. You don't want it to be the son-in-law who you don't feel too good about.
Why is this man holding my hand? Why is this happening?
Not you.
Anyone but you. Oh, man.
But yeah, John passed, I think the next day or that night, maybe.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah. And my parents have been with their parents when they passed, as it's happening. I can't imagine being there that moment when it's happening. I think that there's a chance that'll happen in our future with one of our loved ones, perhaps, but that's crazy to think of.
Yeah. I mean, Anna's family was very fortunate in that everyone was able to come in, spend time in the final hours. There were overnight shifts where basically people took turns watching him, make sure his meds were up, because he was on pain meds just to make him comfortable.
Right.
And so I had an overnight shift and then went to bed. And then, if I remember correctly, someone came out and got Anna, because we were out in the little guest hut, came out at 5 a.m. and got her. And then she came back a little bit later and said, yeah, he's gone. But most of the brothers and her were there, and the mom were there, and he got to die at home in his room.
That is nice.
It's about as good as you can hope for.
Yeah. And with your family.
Yeah. As good as you can hope for it to be.
That's why I want to make a family, so I have family to be around me when I'm dying. Make them all sad.
Get married first.
Okay. Is that what God wants?
Learn from your father.
Well, I learned my father is just to stick around. It doesn't really matter if you're married or not. Just if you have a kid, stick around.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. True. And if anything, he got married many, many times for what we're to understand.
The marriage was not helping anything.
So maybe don't learn from your father.
He was married many times, and that did not help a damn thing. But I'll be incredibly devastated when my parents are gone. I don't want to think about that. my mom, I've always been a mama's boy, and she needs to live forever. So I'm going to make her retire soon, hopefully, and she'll be really healthy and never die. And then, I just watched a Queer Eye show just recently. Queer Eye is a fantastic show, by the way. I don't know if you and Anna watch it. Do you?
I don't even know what platform it's on.
Oh, it's on Netflix. And every episode is it's a wonderful transformation of one person that's nominated by a friend or family member of their own to not just give them a makeover, but to help them better take care of themselves and their lives. And often they're people that are doing really good in their community. So it's incredibly heart-wrenching, and seeing people be so happy and realizing they need to take care of themselves, not just their other people and their family.
Right.
So it's not just like the Queer Eye for the Straight guy, like back in the 90s. Now it's like women, men, trans people, everybody's, they are nominated. But this one old guy, he just was, he was nominated. He was this guy who's owned this crawfish place in Texas for 40 years with his wife, and she passed away 10 years ago, and he's just been never the same. Since she died, he let his hair grow out. He looks ratty. He doesn't take care of himself. He hasn't changed the restaurant one bit in the last 10 years. And so his daughter nominates him for Queer Eye to be, revolutionized and changed and upgraded because he needs, to refresh his life. And he's just like, my partner of all this time just suddenly died of an aneurysm. And I'm like, I turned to my girlfriend, Jolie, and I'm like, you're not allowed to die of an aneurysm.
I say that to Anna all the time. I was like, I have to go first.
Yeah, exactly. But I just see the love in this man's eyes and this devastation it did to him. I'm like, that can't happen to me. I'm starting to love you too much. I can't have you just suddenly die of an aneurysm.
Oh, yeah.
So tell Anna the same thing. She's not allowed to go anywhere.
Oh, yeah. And like, I think to myself, everyone has these depressing, fleeting mental moments where I'm like, well, if something happened to Anna, I would have to keep on going for the kids.
Of course.
Or something happened to one of the kids, we would have to keep on going for the other. But I think to myself, like I can't imagine my life if something happened to Anna and the kids.
Oh, yeah.
Like I can't comprehend a world where I would keep on going on.
Would make no sense at that point. It's like, I don't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. What would my life be?
What am I supposed to do now?
Right.
So let's not think about that. It's not going to happen.
Right.
Plus, we don't go anywhere or do anything anymore or fly anywhere. So they're all going to be safe.
That's right. We're all just staying at home in our sedentary lifestyles.
Yeah. Not getting vitamin D.
I'll go outside sometimes to get mail.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I'm scared to do that now. We let bugs in our porch, so I'm just staying inside.
That's true. Florida has scary bugs.
I'm letting the mail pile up. We're like America's Australia over here.
Well, I think that maybe that brings us to the end.
I think that does bring us to the end of the Sappy Crap podcast.
That's right. Join us next time when we're going to talk about sex. For once I know. So if you guys didn't catch the announcement last time, this is the third to final episode of Sappy Crap. We're going to cap it at 40, walk away into the sunset with an explosion behind us. So the next episode we're going to talk about is sex. Maybe moms don't listen.
Yes.
And then our final episode is going to be about friendship. Finish it out on the warm and fuzzies.
Oh, yes. So thanks for joining us down this delightful stumble down memory lane.
And don't forget, the good old days weren't always that good.
This podcast was brought to you by A Play on Nerds.